I remember that night like it was yesterday, the smell of smoke, the sound of crackling fire, and the reflection of orange flames dancing across the chrome hood of my old tractor. That machine wasn't just metal and bolts, it was the heart of my land. My father taught me how to drive it when I was 10, and now it was burning right in front of me. Across the road under the dim glow of a street lamp, I saw her Karen Holloway pink blazer arms crossed, phone in hand, recording like she'd just won a war. She smiled, all because I said no. No, I won't join your HOA. No, I don't need your rules. And now, she thought she could teach me a lesson with fire. She didn't know yet. I'm not just a farmer. I'm the sheriff of this county. Before we dive into this madness, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button if you love real-life HOA revenge stories like this one. They say trouble never starts loud, it whispers first. For me, it began with a knock on the fence and a voice too sweet to be sincere. "Good afternoon, Mr. Turner," she said, standing there in a pink blazer, clipboard in hand, like she owned the whole valley. "I'm Karen Holloway, president of the newly formed Willow Creek HOA. I wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood." I leaned on my rake, looked over the fence, and smiled politely. "Appreciate it, ma'am. But I've lived here since 1981. The neighborhood kinda welcomed me first." She laughed, a high-pitched, fake thing that sounded like a car alarm. "Of course, we just thought it'd be wonderful if you joined our association. We're creating a more organized community now that so many new residents are moving in." I already knew where this was going. I'd seen it before. They start with flowers and friendly waves and end with rules about paint colors, mailbox heights, and how tall your grass can be. I wiped my hands on my jeans. "Karen, my land's been here long before that HOA ever existed. I'm not inside your boundary lines. I'm county land." Her smile twitched. "Boundaries can change, Mr. Turner, and so can attitudes." I chuckled. "Then I guess both of ours are staying the same." She didn't like that. Her eyes hardened just for a second before she plastered the smile back on. "Well, I hope you'll reconsider. We do things together here in Willow Creek." "Good for you," I said. "I do things right here." She left with a fake laugh and a wave, but I could tell that wasn't the end of it. 2 days later, a letter showed up in my mailbox. No stamp, no envelope, just a folded note. "Community participation is mandatory for harmony and safety." That night I noticed a drone hovering near my barn. It had the HOA logo taped to its side. I grabbed my flashlight and pointed it straight at the camera. The drone zipped away. By the weekend, someone had spray-painted 3 big red words on my front gate: "Join or pay." Now, I'd been sheriff long enough to know when something crossed from annoying to criminal. But at that point, I wasn't wearing that badge. I was just Bill Turner, old man with a stubborn streak. And I figured, fine. Let her play her little power games. Maybe she'd get bored. Spoiler alert, she didn't. 3 nights later, around 10 p.m., I was sitting by the fireplace reading an old Louis L'Amour novel when I heard a pop outside, not a loud explosion, just the sound of something igniting. At first, I thought it was kids lighting fireworks. Then came the glow through the window, orange bright, growing fast. I ran out barefoot, heart pounding. My tractor, my father's tractor, was up in flames. Fire crawling across the seat, licking at the tires, black smoke rolling into the sky. I grabbed the hose, turned the valve, nothing. The line was cut. I sprinted to the well pump. Dry. Someone had closed it. I could feel the heat on my face as I stumbled back, helpless, watching years of sweat and soil burn away. The smell of burning rubber and diesel filled the air. And then I saw her. Across the road, just beyond the mailbox, Karen stood with her phone raised. The flames reflected in her glasses. Her face was calm, too calm. When she realized I was looking right at her, she smiled, a slow, knowing smile. Then she turned, got into her white SUV, and drove off. I didn't yell, didn't chase. Just watched her taillights fade into the dark. Sometimes silence is louder than shouting. The fire crew came 15 minutes later. They did what they could, but by then the tractor was just a skeleton, blackened metal, twisted parts, a few scraps of burnt paint. "Electrical," one of the firefighters asked, shining a light under the hood. "Doubt it," I said. "That machine's older than most of the people in this county, but she's never caught fire before." He sniffed. "Smells like gas." Yeah, I knew it too. They left around midnight, and I was alone again, standing in the dark, watching steam rise off the wet ashes. A part of me wanted to storm over to her fancy house and demand an answer. But that's what she wanted. She wanted me angry, emotional, reckless. So I went back inside, poured a glass of whiskey, and sat down at the kitchen table. Then I reached into the drawer and pulled out my old badge. It had a small chip on the corner from years ago when I dropped it, chasing a suspect through the woods. I hadn't worn it since I retired 3 months earlier, but looking at that fire, I knew retirement was over. The next morning, Karen came strolling down my driveway like nothing had happened. She had her sunglasses on, coffee cup in hand. "Oh my, what a tragedy," she said with a mock gasp. "I heard about the fire. The whole community is just devastated." I folded my arms. "You were here last night," she blinked. "Excuse me, out by the road. I saw you," she smirked. "Bill, you can't accuse people without evidence." "Maybe it was an accident." "Maybe it was," I said evenly. "But accidents don't smile back." Her smirk faltered. She took a sip of coffee. "You know, refusing to join the HOA doesn't exactly make you a team player. Things happen when folks isolate themselves." I stepped closer. "Is that a threat or just poor phrasing?" Karen held her ground. "It's community advice." Then she turned and walked off, heels clicking like punctuation marks on the gravel. That day, I took photos of everything: the burn marks, the tracks on the dirt road, the cut water line, the note from the mailbox. I saved them in a folder labeled WCHOA Incident Number 01. I didn't report it yet. Not officially. Instead, I went to the hardware store, bought new locks, motion sensors, and a few outdoor cameras. By nightfall, I had one camera aimed right at the entrance to my property where she'd stood the night before. And for good measure, I parked what was left of my tractor right there in plain view. Burnt ugly, a blackened statement piece that said, "I'm still here." Around midnight, I saw the first flash of headlights creeping by. Same white SUV. Slow, deliberate. The camera caught everything: the plate, the face, the smirk. But I didn't move. Not yet. I wanted her to think I was just an old fool, too stubborn to fight back. Because when people underestimate you, they make mistakes. And Karen was about to make a big one. The next morning, another letter showed up. This one printed, sealed with the HOA logo: "Dear Mr. Turner, due to multiple complaints about unsightly property damage, the Willow Creek HOA board is considering taking community action if you continue to neglect restoration. Please comply or further steps will be taken." Community action. I almost laughed. The woman who burned my tractor now wanted me fined for unsightly damage. That's when I realized something. Karen didn't just want me to join the HOA. She wanted to own me. She wanted control. She wanted obedience. But what she didn't know was that she'd just declared war on the wrong man. I wasn't just some retired farmer. I was the sheriff, and I'd just reopened my first case. By morning, the air still smelled faintly of burnt rubber. My whole property looked like a crime scene: blackened ground, scorched grass, melted tools scattered around the tractor's grave. But instead of sadness, I felt something else rising in my chest. Focus. Cold, deliberate focus. I'd seen hundreds of cases in my years wearing the badge. Arson, fraud, vandalism, domestic squabbles, but this was personal. Not just because she burned something I loved, but because she thought I wouldn't fight back. She didn't know who she was dealing with. I started with the basics: evidence collection, just like I'd taught younger deputies a dozen times before. First, the ground near the barn. A faint trail of footprints in the dirt. Small, narrow heel. Women's shoes, likely size 8 or 9. I crouched down, snapped photos with my phone, and measured the stride. Next, the remnants of a red plastic container half melted near the fence line. I could still smell gasoline inside. No fingerprints visible to the naked eye, but that didn't matter. I wasn't building a courtroom case yet, I was building pressure. The drone footage I'd captured the night before added fuel to the fire. Clear as daylight, Karen's white SUV creeping by the fence at 11:47 p.m., 15 minutes before the explosion. Coincidence? Not in my world. Later that morning, I walked into Miller's Hardware, the only store within 10 miles. The owner, Frank Miller, had known me since I was a rookie deputy. "Morning, Bill," he said, nodding toward the soot stains on my shirt. "Heard about your tractor. Damn shame." "Yeah," I said quietly. "You sell 5-gallon fuel containers recently, red plastic ones." Frank frowned. "Couple days ago, yeah. Lady bought 2 of them. Drove a white SUV. Said it was for lawn care equipment." I showed him the footage still on my phone. "This her." He squinted. "That's her, all right. Wore that fancy pink jacket like she was buying perfume, not gas." I smiled faintly. "Appreciate it, Frank. Keep this between us for now." "Bill," he said, lowering his voice, "you ain't gonna, handle this like old times, are you?" I gave a half grin. Old habits die hard. That night I went through the HOA group's public posts online. Their website was filled with smiling faces, neatly trimmed lawns, and phrases like "building community together." But on their private Facebook group, which I could access through a dummy account, things were different. One comment thread caught my eye: Karen H. Some residents need a reminder that rules aren't optional. Tom W. You mean Turner. The farm guy, Karen H. Let's just say he'll learn about consequences soon. Lynn S. Lol, don't get yourself arrested, Karen H. Only if someone calls the cops. And last I checked, he's got no friends on the board. I sat back in my chair, the faint glow of the laptop reflecting off my badge. No friends on the board, maybe not. But I didn't need friends. I had authority. Still, this wasn't the time to expose myself. I wanted to see how far she'd go. The following day, I drove into town to visit county records. The Willow Creek HOA had only been established 6 months earlier. I knew their bylaws were registered there. The clerk, a young woman named Jenny, pulled up the digital files for me. You looking for something specific, Sheriff? I mean, Mr. Turner, I smiled. Just curious who signed the property expansion permits. She scrolled down, frowning. That's weird. There's a request for territorial annexation filed 3 weeks ago, signed by Karen Holloway. It lists your land parcel as future inclusion. I leaned closer. And was that approved? Jenny shook her head. Denied. Twice. She appealed last week, though. Looks like she's trying to redraw the HOA boundary, redraw the line, just like she promised. That evening, I found another envelope taped to my gate. This is your final notice. Your property remains an eyesore and a danger to the community's image. Either remove the debris or the HOA will take corrective action. It wasn't even signed. Just the Willow Creek logo at the bottom, a little drawing of a willow tree that suddenly looked more like a snake to me. I laughed out loud. Corrective action. That woman had no idea she was stacking felonies like firewood. Still, I played along. Over the next few nights, I noticed Karen's car drive by slower and slower. Sometimes she'd even stop pretending to check her phone while staring at my property. Once she rolled down the window and yelled, still refusing to clean that mess up, Bill, I waved cheerfully. Still refusing to follow illegal orders, Karen, her SUV roared off, but I saw her brake lights flicker. She was fuming. I spent the following weekend setting up motion-triggered cameras around the fence line and installing a few hidden sensors near the barn ones that would automatically send images to my phone. On Sunday night at exactly 10:42 p.m., I got a notification. 2 figures, one tall, one short, both wearing dark hoodies, walking along the ditch toward my property. One carried a flashlight, the other, something metallic. I zoomed in on the feed. It was blurry, but I could make out the glint of blonde hair escaping from the hood. Karen. They reached my fence. The taller one, her accomplice, started loosening one of the boards. I could even hear faint laughter through the mic. I didn't move, didn't grab my gun, didn't even turn on the porch light, because right then the law wasn't supposed to scare them. It was supposed to watch. They slipped through the fence and disappeared behind the barn. A few minutes later, I heard whispering, then a metallic clank. When I checked the feed again, they were planting something near the tractor wreck. I waited until they left, then went to check. There, half buried in the dirt, was a small painted wooden stake, bright red, labeled HOA property line. They'd literally tried to move the border onto my land. I almost laughed. Congratulations, Karen, I muttered. You just trespassed. On county land. The next morning, I called my old deputy, Mason Clark, still serving in the sheriff's office. Mason, I said, got a situation brewing. Don't log it yet. Just listen. He knew that tone, the one I used before something big. Karen again, bigger, I said. We're past harassment. She's crossing lines physically and legally. He whistled. You want me to pull up her background? Yeah. Also, check any incident reports in her name, property disputes, civil complaints, threats. A few hours later, Mason called back. You're gonna love this. She's been reported in 2 other HOAs, one in Mesa Ridge, one in Palmwood Estates. Both times she got removed for abuse of authority and intimidation of residents. I smirked. Pattern behavior, perfect. You thinking of pressing charges? Mason asked. Not yet, I said. I'm thinking of pressing record. That night I set up one last camera right at the mailbox. It was small, hidden behind a reflector. I had a hunch Karen couldn't resist one more message. Sure enough, around midnight headlights swept across my yard again. The camera caught her perfectly pink robe, messy hair, slipping another letter into my mailbox. The next morning I found it waiting for me. You're making this harder than it needs to be, Bill. We could have avoided all this trouble if you just joined like everyone else. Stop being stubborn. At the bottom, a hand-drawn smiley face. For the first time in years, I actually laughed out loud while reading a threat. She thought she had me cornered, but I'd already set the trap. All I needed now was for her to step into it. I poured myself a cup of coffee, opened my laptop, and began typing a short, official-looking email to Willow Creek HOA Board. From County Environmental Division Subject Community Cleanup Initiative. Dear Willow Creek HOA, the county is conducting an environmental inspection and community cleanup initiative this coming Saturday. Participation is strongly recommended for HOA leadership. Regards, County Compliance Office. The letterhead looked perfectly legitimate because it was mine. I leaned back, watching the screen glow. The plan was simple: draw Karen out, get her to step foot on my property again, this time with cameras rolling and officers waiting nearby. She'd burn my tractor to teach me a lesson. Now I was going to teach her what happens when you play with fire and forget who writes the laws. She didn't just simmer, she boiled over. Once she realized polite nudges and graffiti weren't enough, Karen started turning every trivial thing into an act of war. It was like watching a small animal puff itself up to look bigger, only this animal had a megaphone and a colony of gullible followers. That Monday morning, I drove into town to pick up a prescription and found half the diner table whispering about me. The owner, Rosa, slid a newspaper across the counter. Front page, big bold letters, HOA Landowner, Clashes Community Concerns Rise. There was a grainy photo of my burnt tractor courtesy of Karen's viral video, and a caption implying I was neglectful and a safety hazard. Someone had edited in a close-up of a rusty oil can next to the wreck, as if I was keeping explosives as decor. Professional smear, amateur morals. I turned the page slowly, tasting the cheapness of it. Karen had already started her PR campaign. She was good at making ordinances sound like empathy. A call for community standards became a weapon in her hands. By Tuesday, the HOA sent formal letters not to my mailbox but to the county complaints about environmental hazards and a request to hold a public hearing on land use violations. They even petitioned for a fine. The paper trail made it look official, and some neighbors began to mutter. Fear is contagious. Gossip is the infection. The escalation was deliberate. Karen wanted to create chaos that pointed at me. If she could manufacture outrage, she could justify anything: fines, easements, even forced removal. That was always the playbook of bureaucratic bullies surround a man with paperwork until he caves. I began keeping a schedule: surveillance at dawn, legal research after lunch, evidence cataloging in the evening. But I also spent time listening to the small things folks said under their breath. A neighbor named Jerry stopped by with a coffee and said, "Bill, you sure you want to take this on? She's got the board eating from her hand." I nodded. I know Jerry. But someone's got to teach her a lesson in legal boundaries. That afternoon, my phone pinged with an alert. One of the hidden cameras had captured movement at the far corner of my property, the boundary where the HOA had tried to plant that red stake. I watched the clip. It was Karen, yes, but not alone. She had brought two men in hoodies, contractors perhaps, and they were measuring, laughing, talking about park expansion as if it were a picnic. One held a clipboard, another carried a small jerry can. My stomach tightened. This was no longer just intimidation. This was an attempt to manufacture a fait accompli to physically alter my land under the pretense of community improvement. They were play-acting bureaucracy to create the illusion of consent. So I did the only thing I could do in the moment. I called in favors. Mason, my old deputy, and a couple of reliable county inspectors came by under the guise of routine checks. They cruised past my property in an unassuming truck, then parked across the road and pretended to check a mud flap. I kept a low profile but felt the network spring into action, the county's muscle, the kind Karen would have preferred not to test, she noticed. Within hours, she ramped up her rhetoric on the HOA page, pictures of children playing pleas about community safety posts, calling for volunteers to inspect and restore problematic properties. People loved a cause, especially one dressed as protection. She had the crowd. All she needed was proof of my wrongdoing. The night they decided to escalate again, she did it in a way that revealed her escalating desperation. They vandalized the adjoining creekside fence, cut posts, scattered nails, posted a crude sign that read, "Future Community Park, do not cross." The message was blunt and childish. I could almost hear the smirk when they hammered that sign in. I gathered the evidence the next morning. The nails were brand new, the posts freshly sawed. Whoever did it wanted the sign to look sudden, like an act of public necessity. It was performative vandalism with a political purpose. Whoever heard public necessity often forgot to check who declared it. While cataloging the damage, I found another letter tucked under a rock. This one was not typed like Karen's usual missives. It was handwritten in hasty script. "We're trying to protect everyone. Stop resisting and this will end. No signature. Cowards Inc." But the coward didn't stop there. As if the signs and petitions weren't enough, Karen began personally confronting neighbors door to door, wielding anecdotes as weapons. "He's dangerous," she'd say, leaning on a porch rail as if she'd stumbled into some civic revelation. "He's a liability. Imagine if a child got hurt on his property." Her voice was velvet, but venom-lined every word. Mrs. Dobbins across the lane, who had always been friendly to me, confessed to me later, eyes wide with embarrassment, that Karen turned up on her doorstep with a smartphone held like a Bible. "She told me you're a recluse who hoards old equipment," Mrs. Dobbins said. "Said it was community duty to report you." When I asked why she believed her, Mrs. Dobbins looked down. "She's persuasive, Bill. She makes everyone feel like a hero for policing their neighbor." That was the trick. Make people think they're doing the right thing by following the loud voice. Make them complicit before they know they're being used. I could have exposed Karen immediately, the footage, the drone, the fuel cans, the graffiti, but I wanted more than exposure. I wanted the law to land on her like winter on a river, sudden, definitive, and impossible to ignore. A public scolding would be pleasant, but it wouldn't fix the rot she seeded in people's heads. For that, she needed to be held accountable in a way that stripped power from the bully and returned it to the community. So I shifted gears. It was time to let the county play its part. I started filing formal complaints, not obvious ones, but the kind bureaucrats take seriously: unauthorized boundary marking, falsified HOA petitions, false reporting. I filed them under the right channels, using the red stake evidence, the gas container receipts, the drone log. Each report was a notch in the legal belt I intended to wear when the time came. When Karen got wind of the county stepping closer, her temper rose like a storm. The posts turned shriller. "We will not be intimidated by a man hiding behind archaic deeds." She began to name me publicly, to frame me not as the victim, but as the villain. Slander is a blunt instrument, but it works if no one challenges the story. That was the moment I realized how fragile community truth is. One loud voice can drown out days of quiet evidence. It's why law exists, to tilt the scales back toward impartiality. It's also why I had to be patient. Impartiality requires proof. Proof takes time. On a rainy Thursday, as the county clerk acknowledged receipt of my formal complaints, I sat on the porch and watched Karen's white SUV pull into the HOA, lot like a shark circling. She stepped out hair immaculate, despite the drizzle, and planted herself at the podium of the community gazebo as if it were an altar. Cameras were assembled, phones raised. She launched into another speech about protecting our children and restoring value to our homes. People clapped. Some cheered. Others squinted, trying to reconcile the woman on stage with the woman I'd watched set my tractor ablaze. It was remarkable the way a narrative can be curated: gentle music, carefully chosen words, a chorus of nodding heads. I stood at the edge of the crowd, a silent figure, with a folder of evidence tucked under my arm like a secret weapon. She was building her mythology, but I was building her downfall. The two projects required different timelines. When she finished, the applause faded into a buzz of chatter, the kind that smells like shifting loyalties. I felt the balance slowly tilting, not because of noise, but because the county was moving its pieces. Karen had escalated, yes, but with each escalation, she left footprints. And I, Sheriff Turner, was following those prints straight to the truth. By the time the next week rolled around, the air in Willow Creek felt thick with tension. You could sense it even before you stepped out of the truck, that strange quiet right before a thunderstorm breaks. Everyone in the neighborhood was whispering. The HOA's community cleanup event was all over social media, plastered with Karen's favorite buzzwords: unity, safety, progress. The poster featured her smiling in a pink blazer, arms wide open, as if she were inviting peace, not planning a coup. Underneath the image were the words, "Join us this Saturday for a community-wide cleanup. Help us reclaim neglected spaces and beautify our shared land." Shared land. I almost laughed when I read that part. Nothing about my property had ever been shared, not the soil, not the fence, and sure as hell not the freedom. Still, I clicked attending. That Friday evening, I met Deputy Mason at the sheriff's substation. The place still smelled of coffee and gun oil, same as it had for 20 years. He leaned back in his chair and looked at me with that half grin he always used before a risky operation. "So let me get this straight," he said. "You're inviting the enemy to your own property for a trap." "Not a trap," I corrected. "An inspection," he laughed. "You always were a man for semantics." I pulled out the printed flyer. "She's going to bring her whole board, and at least a few contractors. Probably a cameraman too. They'll trespass, record everything, and call it community service." Once she steps 1 foot past the gate, we move in. No guns, no shouting, just cuffs and silence. Mason nodded slowly. You sure you don't want to tell the DA first? I want the DA to see the video, not hear a story. This needs to be clean, unquestionable. He drummed his fingers on the table. You think she's really gonna show? Oh, she'll show, I said. Karen never misses a stage. Saturday morning dawned clear and sharp, the kind of morning where sunlight cuts through the fog like a blade. I wore my old brown jacket, the one people recognize from the old sheriff's press photos, and had a small camera pinned to my collar. My land looked perfect for bait, half the fence down the blackened tractor sitting right at the boundary, the ground dry and dusty. The perfect neglected property for Karen to pretend to fix. At 9:14 a.m., I saw them coming, a caravan of white SUVs and shiny sedans snaking down the road. Each one bore the HOA's seal on the side window like some kind of suburban military convoy. The first car parked by the fence. Karen stepped out, sunglasses on clipboard, in hand radiating smug authority. Behind her came 2 board members, Tom the nervous one, and Lynn, who always filmed everything for social media. I could hear her before I could see her clearly. That voice carried like a siren. All right, everyone, let's make this quick and organized. We'll start by removing debris and marking the new border. Her tone was bright, rehearsed, dripping with self-righteousness. I stood by the barn, arms crossed, pretending to be just another spectator. Karen pointed toward the burnt tractor. See that? That's what happens when negligence goes unchecked. Dangerous, unsightly, unacceptable. Lynn's camera swung toward the wreck. Karen, say that again for the record. She did. Oh, she did, word for word, smiling at the lens, like she was hosting a morning show. And then she gave the order. Let's move the old debris, clear it out. This area will be the first extension of the Willow Creek Greenway project. 2 hired laborers lifted the broken fence post and started dragging it inward. One of them hesitated. Ma'am, this line looks like it's on his side, Karen scoffed. Honey, his side doesn't exist anymore. It's all community land now. That was it. The line crossed. I took 1 step forward, dropped my hand, and spoke into the mic clipped to my collar. All right, boys, move in. From the tree line behind my barn, 2 patrol trucks rolled out, slow and steady tires crunching gravel. Mason stepped out, first, badge glinting in the morning light. Karen froze mid-sentence, blinking like she'd just seen a ghost. Mason, she stammered. What is this? He didn't answer. He just pointed to me. I walked out from the shadow of the barn straight toward her. She tried to smile, then realized my jacket was open, revealing the badge clipped to my belt. Her lips parted in disbelief. You're a cop. Not quite, I said calmly. I'm the sheriff. The silence that followed was almost holy. Even the birds stopped singing. Karen looked around, waiting for someone to laugh to tell her this was a prank. But no one did. Karen Holloway, I said, my voice steady, official, practiced. You are trespassing on county property, engaging in unauthorized alteration of boundaries, and obstructing a lawful investigation. You have the right to remain silent. Tom dropped his clipboard. Lynn's camera was still rolling, shaking in her hands. Karen's composure cracked. This is insane. You can't arrest me for helping the community. I nodded toward the burnt tractor. Helping the community? You mean burning private property and then pretending to clean up your own mess? Her face flushed red. I didn't. That's slander. I turned slightly. Mason, roll the footage. He lifted his phone and played the drone clip on loudspeaker. Karen's SUV. Pulling up near my property, her silhouette leaning forward, phone raised, fire flickering in the reflection. You could hear her voice faintly saying, maybe now he'll understand. She went pale. Now I continued, you're also facing arson and vandalism charges. The 2 laborers stepped back instantly. Tom muttered, I told you this was a bad idea, Karen. Shut up, she snapped. But it was over. I could see it in her eyes, the realization that she had underestimated the wrong man, the wrong property, the wrong fire. Mason approached her calmly, cuffs in hand. Ma'am, please turn around. She shook her head, stepping backward. You're making a mistake. I'm the president of the Willow Creek HOA. I run this community, I smiled faintly. Not anymore. She lunged toward me, finger pointed like a blade. You tricked me, Turner. You set me up. I didn't flinch. No, Karen. You set yourself up the moment you tried to redraw a line that wasn't yours. Mason clicked the cuffs shut. The metallic sound echoed down the road like a closing chapter. By noon, the area was crawling with deputies and curious neighbors peeking from behind hedges. Word spread faster than wildfire. The same folks who once whispered about me were now whispering about her, about how the mighty HOA queen got caught red-handed. Lynn's video, the one she filmed at the scene, leaked online before sundown. It went viral. The comments were merciless. HOA president arrested by the sheriff she tried to bully. You can't make this up. By sunset, the Willow Creek signboard, the one that once boasted community pride shared vision, had been quietly taken down. That night, I sat on my porch with a mug of coffee and watched the flashing red and blue lights fade in the distance. My property was silent again except for the crickets. I could still see the black marks on the ground where my tractor had burned, but now they felt different, less like scars, more like signatures. Proof that standing your ground still meant something in this world. Mason came back later to file the final report. You know, he said, chuckling, I almost feel bad for her. Almost. I nodded. She built her own fire, Mason. I just watched it burn. He laughed. Classic Turner. Always poetic when you win. I shrugged. Justice should sound good, don't you think? He raised his coffee cup. To justice, then. To consequences, I corrected, clinking mine against his. Because justice isn't always about the badge, sometimes it's about reminding people that no one, not even a Karen in a pink blazer, is above the line. By Monday morning, Willow Creek looked like a crime scene disguised as a parade ground. Sheriff units had already combed through my property, tagged evidence, and released statements. The HOA sign had been taken down overnight, and the once smug homeowners were suddenly quiet. They weren't angry, they were scared. But I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. I'd learned long ago that a case isn't over when you make the arrest, it's over when the truth can stand on its own. And truth, like good whiskey, needs time to settle. 3 days after Karen's arrest, the county office called a press conference. The district attorney wanted to address community concerns. I showed up in plain clothes hat, pulled low, mostly to observe. The hall was packed, homeowners, reporters, even the same people who had once applauded Karen's speeches about unity. The DA, a woman named Angela Carter, stepped up to the microphone. After reviewing the preliminary evidence, she said, "We are filing charges of arson, trespassing, and destruction of private property against Ms. Holloway. We are also investigating misuse of HOA funds and falsification of boundary documents." A collective gasp rolled through the room. Phones flashed. A few people actually clapped quick, guilty claps that died the moment others glared at them. I stayed in the back, arms folded. Karen wasn't there, of course. She was sitting in county holding her pink blazer replaced by an orange jumpsuit. I almost smiled at the irony, still matching the color scheme of community pride. After the conference, a few neighbors approached me cautiously, like kids approaching a sleeping bear. Sheriff Turner, one woman said, we didn't know she was like that. I looked at her kindly but firmly. Maybe next time don't wait for smoke before you see the fire. That night, I drove home under the cool glow of a harvest moon. The air felt lighter. My land, my fence, my barn, my scorched soil stood in silence, finally respected. But silence can also be lonely. When you fight long enough, even victory feels like another duty to complete. I sat on the porch, poured a small bourbon, and thought about the cleanup day, how easily a group of people could be manipulated by one person's need for control. They hadn't meant harm, most of them. They just followed the loudest voice. And that, I realized, is how corruption works best, not through violence, but through applause. The following morning, Mason showed up with paperwork and a grin. "You're not going to believe this," he said, dropping a folder onto my table. Inside were photos Karen's home office. The search warrant had turned up forged petitions, fake HOA invoices, and even cash envelopes labeled with residents' names. She'd been skimming dues and using the money to fund her community campaigns. I whistled low. She built herself an empire of paper. An empire of lies, Mason corrected. She thought she could hide behind bylaws and small print. People always do, I said, until ink turns into evidence. He grinned. DA's going to add fraud and embezzlement to her charges. She'll be lucky if she sees daylight before retirement age. Guess she'll finally learn about boundaries, I said dryly. That week, the HOA board called for an emergency meeting without Karen, of course. They asked if I'd attend as both property owner and law enforcement representative. I agreed, partly to make sure they didn't sweep things under the rug. The meeting was held at the community hall, the same place Karen had once lectured me about joining for harmony. Now her chair sat empty, nameplate removed. Tom, the nervous board member, stood up first. "We want to apologize, Sheriff. We got caught up in her enthusiasm." I raised an eyebrow. Enthusiasm doesn't usually include arson. He swallowed hard. "We'll dissolve the old board and form a new one with county oversight this time." "That's a good start," I said. "But I've got a better idea. How about you folks stop trying to run other people's lives and start taking care of your own fences?" The room chuckled awkwardly. Even they knew it was fair. When I stepped outside after the meeting, a cool breeze swept across the field. The smell of cut grass and dust mixed together, that old, honest smell that reminded me why I'd never left the county. Across the road, the scorched outline of my tractor still sat like a ghost. I hadn't decided whether to scrap it or rebuild it. Maybe both. Then something unexpected happened. A small group of neighbors came walking up the drive. 3 families, including Mrs. Dobbins, the woman Karen had manipulated with her stories. They carried toolboxes and paint buckets. "Sheriff," she said, smiling nervously, "we thought we'd help fix your fence. Consider it a peace offering." For a moment I just looked at them, honest hands, tired faces, people who'd been fooled but wanted to make things right. "All right," I said, nodding slowly. "But I get the first hammer swing." We spent the afternoon rebuilding the fence. It wasn't perfect, the boards were uneven, the nails not quite straight, but it was ours. The sound of hammers clinking and people laughing felt better than any courtroom victory. Halfway through, Jerry from down the road brought over his old red tractor. "It's not as fancy as yours," he said, "but it runs. Figure it'll hold you over until you rebuild." I placed a hand on the hood. "Appreciate it, Jerry. Guess good neighbors still exist after all," he chuckled. "Always did, Bill. We just needed the bad ones gone to notice." A few days later, Mason called. Karen's lawyer's trying for a plea deal. Claims the fire was an accident, says she only came by to inspect damages. I sighed. "She's still lying, even with cuffs on." "Yeah," he said. "But don't worry. We've got everything, video, testimony, receipts. She's cooked." "Then let her simmer," I said. He laughed. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" "Not exactly," I replied. "I just like when arrogance meets gravity." The trial came 2 months later. I testified briefly, keeping my tone measured and professional. The courtroom was packed. Karen's once flawless hair was dull now, her face pale under the fluorescent lights. When the prosecution played the video, her SUV headlights, her voice saying, "Maybe now he'll understand," the room went dead silent. She stared at the floor. Her defense attorney tried to twist it, saying, "It could have been a misunderstanding." My client was concerned for community safety. I leaned forward slightly, looking straight at her. "She wasn't concerned for safety," I said. "She was concerned for control." The jury didn't take long. Guilty on all counts. When the judge read the sentence, 5 years with probation to follow, Karen didn't cry. She just looked at me with that same icy glare she'd used the day she asked me to join. Except this time her power was gone. Afterward, as the bailiffs led her away, she muttered, "You think you've won, Sheriff? People like me always come back." I shook my head. "Not to Willow Creek, you won't." Outside, the courthouse reporters swarmed. Someone asked if I had any message for the community. I said, "Yeah, don't let leadership blind you. Rules mean nothing without respect. And sometimes the people enforcing the loudest rules are the ones breaking them the most." The crowd clapped. I didn't linger. I've never been one for applause. That night I drove home under a red sunset. The sky looked like fire again, but this time it wasn't angry. It was calm, cleansing. The kind of fire that renews what it burns. I parked near the rebuilt fence and shut off the engine. The place felt alive again, kids riding bikes, dogs barking in the distance, porch lights glowing. The same neighborhood that once tried to bury me now nodded as I passed. Respect had replaced suspicion. As I stood there, wind brushing through the grass, I realized something. Karen thought she could take control of everything, land, law, people. But she never understood that control is borrowed, not owned. It's earned through trust. And when you lose that trust, even your title president, chairwoman, queen of the HOA turns into dust. The cleanup day was supposed to destroy my peace. Instead, it cleaned the whole town. You'd think after the trial, things would calm down. But peace never comes easy in small towns, especially when pride still smolders under the ashes. Even with Karen behind bars, the aftershocks lingered like a bad storm that refused to leave. The HOA board was in chaos. Without their queen, half the members resigned and the rest scrambled to rebuild their reputation. They held meetings about healing and moving forward, but all it sounded like was damage control. You can repaint a burned house, but the smoke smell never leaves. Meanwhile, I went back to my routines. The orchard needed trimming, the barn roof leaked again, and the new tractor Jerry lent me needed oil changes more often than cents. Normal things, the kind that keep you grounded after chaos. But sometimes when the wind blew from the south, I could still smell faint traces of burnt diesel. Memories linger even when you win. One quiet afternoon, about a month after the verdict, a plain envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address, just my name in neat, almost delicate handwriting. Inside was a single photograph, me standing outside the courthouse after the trial. Across the bottom, someone had scrawled in black marker, "Justice is temporary. Power finds a way." No signature. But I didn't need one. I set the photo on the table and exhaled slowly. Karen was in prison, but she had followers. People who still believed she'd been targeted, that the big bad sheriff framed her for defending her community. Every small town has its loyal fools. That night, Mason dropped by for a beer. I handed him the photo. He studied it, frowning. "You think she sent it? Either her or one of her wannabe soldiers," I said. "Doesn't matter. The message is the same, they're not done." He sipped his drink. "You want me to run prints on it?" "Nah. Let 'em think I'm sleeping on it. Fear works both ways." He nodded. "You always were good at letting people hang themselves. Patience is the best rope," I said. Over the next week, odd things started happening. My mailbox got knocked down twice. The county sign near my road, the one that marked the edge of my property, was ripped out and dumped in the ditch. Someone even left a dead snake coiled on my porch with a sticky note that said, "You're next." It wasn't fear I felt. It was déjà vu. Same arrogance, different cowards. I installed new cameras this time, infrared and motion triggered. If they wanted to play, I'd make sure the lights were on. 2 nights later, the sensors caught movement. Around 2:14 a.m., 2 figures slipped through the fence, same entry point Karen had used months before. They moved low like they'd rehearsed. I watched the live feed from inside the house, my coffee steaming beside the monitor. One of them carried a canister. The other had something that looked like a hammer. They crept toward the barn. I dialed Mason. "It's happening again." "Same spot?" he asked. "Same arrogance." "I'm 5 minutes out," he said. "Don't engage." But I wasn't planning to engage, not yet. I wanted them caught red-handed. They reached the barn and started prying at the door latch. One whispered something I couldn't quite hear. The other laughed. Then, just as they poured a splash of liquid on the ground, my floodlights snapped on. "Evening, gentlemen," I said, stepping out onto the porch with my badge glinting in the light. They froze deer in headlights, hands where I can see 'em. They hesitated just long enough for the sirens to echo down the road. Mason's cruiser screeched up seconds later. The red and blue lights painted the trees. The shorter one dropped the canister and bolted. The taller one, a man I recognized as Tom Watkins, the former HOA treasurer, just stared, guilt flashing across his face. Mason tackled the runner in the ditch, dragged him up in cuffs. "You idiots never learn, huh?" I walked toward Tom. "Couldn't resist a sequel, huh, Tom?" He swallowed hard. "You don't get it, Turner. She's coming back. She said she'll fix everything. She's in prison." He shook his head, trembling. "Not for long. She's got people, lawyers, donors, other HOAs watching. You think you won. You embarrassed her. She'll make it right." I sighed. She already made it wrong. We cuffed both men, collected the evidence, the gas can, the hammer, the black hoodie embroidered with the Willow Creek logo like some sort of twisted uniform. When Mason opened the trunk of Tom's car, we found a box filled with printed flyers. "Bring back Karen the True, voice of Willow Creek." Propaganda. Pure delusion. The next morning after booking them, I called the DA. "Angela, you might want to prep for round 2. Looks like our queen still has knights." She groaned over the phone. "You've got to be kidding me." I wish I was. "Fine," she said. "We'll tack on conspiracy to commit arson and intimidation." "You've got footage," of course I said. I learned from the best her. The arrest of Tom and his accomplice hit local news by noon. This time the public wasn't confused. They were exhausted. HOA meetings were canceled indefinitely, and half the residents started posting online about leaving the association entirely. The illusion had cracked, finally. But the story wasn't done yet. 2 weeks later, Karen's lawyer filed an appeal claiming procedural errors and bias due to conflict of interest, pointing out that I, the sheriff, was the victim. It was desperate, but it forced a hearing. I attended quietly in the back row. When they brought her in, I almost didn't recognize her. The sharpness was gone from her face. Her posture sagged. But her eyes, those eyes still burned, with that same pride, that same twisted certainty that rules were for everyone else. She looked right at me across the courtroom, and even through the glass divider I could read her lips. This isn't over. Maybe she believed it. Maybe she needed to. But when the judge denied her appeal flatly immediately, the look on her face changed. Pride collapsed into something smaller. Not regret, just awareness. The realization that she'd lost control for good. As she was led away, I caught a glimpse of her reflection in the hallway window. Small, distant, swallowed by the very system she thought she could manipulate. That night, Mason and I drove through Willow Creek one last time. The streets were quiet, the lawns freshly mowed, no more HOA patrols with clipboards. Funny, Mason said, "How peaceful it feels now." I nodded. That's what happens when fear leaves the room. He glanced at me. "You think she'll try anything else?" "From inside, maybe," I said. But people like her can't thrive without an audience. The stage is gone. We drove past the old signpost, where her community pride banner once hung. Only 2 metal poles remained rusted and bent, pointing upward like gravestones. When we got back to my place, the air was cool, calm, the kind of quiet that doesn't hide trouble anymore. The new tractor sat beside the barn, the old one still rusting behind it, a reminder of everything that had happened. Mason lingered for a bit, staring at it. "You ever gonna get rid of that thing?" I smiled. "No. That tractor stays. It's proof." "Proof of what?" "That even when someone tries to burn down what's yours, you can rebuild without losing who you are." He nodded. "Deep, Sheriff. Occupational hazard," I said, grinning. He drove off, leaving me standing there in the fading twilight. The stars were just starting to appear, clean, honest, unbothered by human nonsense. I leaned against the fence and breathed in the night air. Somewhere down the road, a coyote howled. For the first time in months, I felt peace, real peace. Not the kind you win by fighting, but the kind that shows up after you stop needing to prove you were right. Karen had her followers, her propaganda, her empty slogans. I had something she never could control: the truth, and that in the end was the only law that ever mattered. It's strange how quiet justice sounds once it's done. No sirens, no shouting, no papers being stamped, just wind over fields and the hum of a tractor engine. That's what my mornings feel like now. Peace doesn't arrive with applause. It drifts in slowly like dawn through fog. It's been 6 months since the trial ended, and Willow Creek is a different place. The HOA board dissolved officially after the county revoked their charter. The sign at the neighborhood entrance that once boasted "a community with pride" now reads simply "Willow Creek Population Learning." A little humor courtesy of the new town clerk. I couldn't have said it better myself. I've gone back to being what I was before this circus began: a farmer, a neighbor, a man who prefers quiet to conflict. Most days start with coffee on the porch and end with dust on my boots. My rebuilt fence gleams under the morning light, and Jerry's old red tractor, the one that replaced my burned one, still chugs faithfully through the rows. Every so often a neighbor waves as they drive by. They used to look away, afraid to be caught on my side. Now they stop to chat, drop off pie, or ask advice about their own property disputes. Apparently being the sheriff who took down an HOA tyrant makes you the unofficial county therapist. Sometimes they apologize for not standing up sooner. I tell them not to bother. Fear, I say, makes good people small for a while. But it doesn't make them bad. They nod relieved, and I can tell they believe it because they want to, because believing it means the town still has a chance to be decent again. Karen's name doesn't come up much anymore. The papers stopped writing about her after the appeal failed, and her supporters melted away the moment there was no reward in loyalty. But her legacy lingers not in power, but in the small changes she forced into existence. The county now requires HOA elections to include an external observer. Fines and enforcement actions need signatures from at least 3 unrelated members. Property expansions must be verified against county maps before any vote. They call it the Holloway Amendment. Fitting, really, her name will outlive her schemes carved into policy as a warning label. Still, sometimes I drive past the old HOA hall. It's quiet now, windows boarded, the once proud sign faded to a pale ghost of its former self. The weeds have crept through the cracks in the sidewalk, curling around the base of the door, like nature reclaiming what arrogance once paved over. I parked there once just to look. Inside, I could still see the outlines on the wall where motivational posters had hung "Together we grow," "Order is beauty," "Rules keep us safe." The slogans looked ridiculous, now stripped of their stage lighting. Without Karen's voice, they were just words, hollow, heavy, meaningless. One afternoon, I got a letter from the county jail. My name typed neatly on the envelope. I almost threw it away, but curiosity got the better of me. Inside it was short, less than a page. "Sheriff Turner, I suppose you think you won. Maybe you did. I wanted control and you took it away. But control never disappears, it changes hands. One day someone worse than me will rise up, and people will cheer again. I don't hate you, I pity you, because you still believe in order." Karen, I read it twice. No apology, no remorse, just defiance wrapped in philosophy. I folded it, tucked it in a drawer, and smiled. She still didn't understand. Order wasn't the enemy. It was her obsession with owning it that destroyed her. Spring came early that year. The fields turned gold, the creek ran clear again, and the air smelled of cedar and soil. On weekends, kids fished along the banks, the same ones the HOA once declared unsafe for community use. A group of volunteers formed what they called the Willow Creek Commons, not an HOA, just neighbors cleaning up litter and planting trees. No dues, no bylaws, no power trips. Just hand sweat and laughter. They invited me to their first gathering. I almost said no, but then I saw the flyer. Bring your tools, your time, or just yourself. No rules, only respect. I showed up with lemonade and a rake. Seeing people work side by side again, kids, elders, families, made me realize something. The best communities aren't managed. They're grown. They don't need enforcers. They need gardeners. Later that day, Mason stopped by. He'd been promoted to chief deputy now, though he still talked like the same sarcastic partner I'd known for decades. He leaned on the fence watching the sunset. Hard to believe it's over, huh? Nothing's ever really over, I said. It just changes shape. He smirked. You sound like you're quoting Karen. I laughed. Yeah, but my version doesn't end with arson. We stood there for a while in comfortable silence. Crickets started chirping, the sky turned purple, and a few porch lights flickered on in the distance. You ever miss it? Mason asked. The badge, the chase, the adrenaline, I thought for a moment. Sometimes, I admitted. But not the politics, not the paperwork. Out here I see justice every morning in straight fence lines and honest work. He nodded. Guess that's why they call you the farmer sheriff. Could be worse, I said. At least the crops don't lie. He chuckled. True. Well, if you ever get bored, we've still got plenty of stubborn people in town who think they're above the law. I raised my cup of coffee, and they'll learn just like she did. That night after Mason left, I sat on the porch one last time and looked across my land. The stars were bright, the air smelled of cut grass and redemption. My rebuilt tractor gleamed faintly under the moonlight, red paint, fresh and clean. I walked up to it, ran a hand over the hood, and smiled. I told you we'd get through it, I murmured. The breeze answered in whispers through the fence rails, soft and steady. Maybe the land remembers things who cared for it, who heard it, who stood their ground. Maybe that's why it gives back to those who treat it right. The next morning, as the sun broke over the horizon, I nailed a small wooden sign to the edge of my fence. Nothing fancy, just 3 words carved by hand, respect the line. It wasn't a warning. It was a reminder for me, for anyone passing by for the town that almost forgot what boundaries meant. Because that's what all this had been about from the start. Not about a tractor, not about HOA rules, not even about revenge. It was about boundaries, the invisible lines that keep decency alive. And maybe in a way, Karen did teach us something, that power without respect burns faster than gasoline. You know, folks ask me sometimes if I regret anything, if I wish I'd just joined the HOA and avoided all the trouble. My answer's always the same. You don't avoid trouble by surrendering to it. Sometimes, standing your ground isn't about being stubborn. It's about being honest. About knowing where your lines are, and refusing to let anyone redraw them for convenience. Karen thought power came from control, but real power comes from restraint, from doing the right thing, even when no one's watching. So, if you're listening to this story, take it from an old sheriff who's seen more fires than he can count. Protect what's yours, but do it with integrity. Speak up, but don't shout. Fight, but don't hate. And most of all, respect the line. Because once you lose respect for it, you'll burn more than fences. You'll burn yourself. What about you? Have you ever had to stand your ground against unfair power? Tell me your story in the comments, and if you enjoyed this one, hit that subscribe button. There are more tales of justice waiting just beyond the fence.